there's a lot of stuff in front of your face that needs to be done, and there isn't enough time to go and research a lot of that, sort of innovation that's happening, and the churning out of cloud services that at every reinvent from AWS, for example. You just can't keep up really with all of that sort of innovation.
Thanks, Rich, for joining us on Cloud Unplugged. Great to have you here.
Pleasure.
Be good for us to give us a bit of an intro. Who are you? What do you do?
Sure, yeah.
How did you end up in this cloud and DevOps world?
This crazy cloud DevOps world, yeah. So I'm Richard Simon. Work as a CTO for T-Systems International. T-Systems is part of Deutsche Telekom, the German telco giant. So my role is really kind of working in the migration space, where we help customers really migrate to cloud and kind of all the things that go along with that. Personally, I've been in IT for over 30 years.
Wow.
Now. So
you don't look
it.
Time.
Yeah. Yeah. So a bit of an expert, I guess, on various things. I've come really sort of through the kind of always had really a passion for technology. So if anybody's actually seeing my T-shirt, and maybe we should do a competition to tell what that T-shirt is.
Okay, all right. Won't give it away too much then.
No, let's not do that. You may want to do that later, but we'll maybe set a competition or something. But anyway, yeah. So I've always kind of been in IT. It's been a passion of mine, and I've really kind of enjoyed doing different types of roles as well. So I've done everything from sort of technical, pre-sales, architecture, and more kind of recently consulting approach, and obviously now kind of focusing more on the sort of the C-level.
So always kind of always helping a customer rather than sort of internal teams deliver on an outcome.
Yeah. So it's and there is a sort of a clear distinction there between sort of doing IT for a particular enterprise, where you're kind of part of an IT team or IT department, versus actually working in the, let's say, vendor space or the consulting space. Yeah.
Because it is like, I guess in the, internally, you're kind of just doing the role, right? You're doing the job,
yes,
getting the outcome. Whereas when you're in a consultancy, it feels a little bit like you have to have another string to your bow, which is how to work with a customer when you're a third part, when you're a vendor.
Yes.
And naturally, as kind of human psychology, you are an other. You are someone other than the actual company that's wanting the outcome. So navigating that challenge as well as doing the role is always a bit tough. But it sounds like you've been through the ring a little bit. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, pre-sales, I think for me, has actually been a role that I've always gone back to, time and again, because I've actually enjoyed, being at that sort of, cutting edge of the technologies coming in. So I have to learn that, but also the thrill of, winning a new sale, winning a new, bid or something like that with a customer. That's always good fun as well.
And what type of projects do you typically kind of get involved in? Is it just all migrations to the cloud? And is it always like public cloud, private cloud? What types of things do you guys like to get involved in?
Yeah, I mean, it's predominantly helping customers really migrate to public cloud. And whatever that entails, it may end up being a hybrid cloud or a multi-cloud of some kind, or as the new term that I learned recently, polycloud.
Polycloud. Wow, okay.
Shall we set another competition for that one?
Buzzwords, buzzword bingo.
Buzzwords, yeah.
Okay, multi-poly hybrid cloud.
Exactly,
nice.
Yes.
What does polycloud mean?
So apparently, and I was speaking to a very good friend of mine who works actually in a research company. The idea is that you effectively use a small number of applications, but they're running in multiple clouds.
Right.
So, for example, you might want your analytics stuff to be in Google's cloud, for example, and maybe your sort of development and things like that might be.
Isn't that just multi-cloud?
Well, it kind of is, but the distinction, I think, is that you're kind of using a small number of applications in let's say not your default cloud, for example. So multi-cloud would be kind of all in on Azure and all in on AWS, let's say. Whereas multi-cloud is kind of so we're going to do our analytics in Google because perhaps their tooling is better.
Right.
We're going to do our development in AWS, and then maybe our production stuff might be in in Azure or something like that.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
yeah, I joked about it and I said, so it's an AS400 in the cloud, basically.
Yeah.
A small number of applications, and that's all that the system is running. So yeah, there you go.
Love it. We're going to get into like mono, poly, all sorts of
and
weird
cross as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Cross cloud.
Wonderful
another one.
Terminologies there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. And I guess the types of organizations that you've kind of probably seen in some of these migrations that you've done or been involved in historically, can you talk a little bit about what you've learned in the sort of large enterprises? So if you've got, I don't know, more than say 500 developers or something like that working in cloud, and you've come from a traditional sort of on-prem operating model and ways of working, what types of things have you typically seen people do, and what shouldn't they what should they stop doing and move to?
I think everybody has been struggling to a degree with how to really use cloud properly and how to utilize cloud technologies and obviously how to get there, how to migrate to cloud. What's kind of the
why do you think that is? Because obviously we're being technologists, we I guess keeping up with the pace of how things move, move and stuff is difficult, right? Why do you think and there's lots of kind of innovation going on with the cloud vendors themselves to try and make things easier, but why do you think people struggle going to cloud?
I think it's the you as we said earlier, you have, as an IT person working for an enterprise, you have your work cut out for you. In most cases, those teams are firefighting. There's a lot of stuff in front of your face that needs to be done, and there isn't enough time to go and research a lot of that, sort of innovation that's happening, and the churning out of cloud services that at every reinvent from AWS, for example, you just can't keep up really with all of that sort of innovation. So although it's there, it's difficult to really go and spend time on it unless you're structured in a way that you can do that. There is somebody who's actually going to look at those things and then see if that will be applicable to the business processes and the way that your business works, and see if that's something that can be done and it can be utilized. So I think it's things like lack of resources, time to spend on it. Maybe like I said, the structure of the organization is not really designed for that. And IT has just been something that facilitates and not innovates as well for the business. So it's I want my office, I want my email, and I want a database, and that's can you just make that available?
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much it.
It's always been kind of like an operations hub or something like that, more so than an innovation kind of thing, right? So and then I guess how that's looked at both financially and then culturally within the business is just go and do a thing rather than there's all of this capability to look at other potential avenues of making money or being better in terms of operations or whatever.
And I think also sometimes because of those decisions that get made at some point, then you kind of settle for those decisions and you stay and stick with those decisions, maybe for longer than you ought to, perhaps. Right. So that's where you end up using or having a corporate database. And one of the recent sort of things that I found talking to a lot of database vendors, as I do sometimes, was the fact that, and actually this is from my experience as well in the past, when I used to go and install software for customers, and I'd say to them, well, and by the way, this application has a built-in database. It's going to install a small database. And they would insist that shouldn't happen, that my app should point to their corporate database. And I say, but guys, it doesn't need Oracle, it doesn't need SQL Server, it doesn't need DB2 or whatever you have. And they would still insist on it because that's the corporate standard.
Amazing.
So I thought, okay, so if that's the case, how many apps out there are actually on all these, lovely, hugely licensed, corporate databases that actually don't really need to be in there. They don't need the capabilities of those, of those platforms.
It's insane. Like in this day and age, that stuff like that still happens. It's like saying, oh, I need to do some work on my house, and the only tool that I'm ever going to need is a hammer. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
No matter what you're doing, putting up some tiles.
Funny you should mention that, because I'm actually having work being done on my house.
Well, can I sell you this hammer? Because this is the one you need.
And ironically, yesterday I was there, because we're not actually living there anymore. And ironically, I was there, and I did see multiple tools. So I'm
good.
Relieved.
Good. They haven't tied you into a single tool.
Yeah, it's not everything's done with a hammer, thank goodness. So yes, I think those are kind of potentially reasons. And then, as I said, there's just not enough strategy space there for innovation and to be looking at things as you go forward. But obviously, that's the idea of if you are going to innovate, is you need somebody like a partner, a consultancy partner, is going to kind of help you with that journey into the cloud.
So let's say let's go with a few kind of scenarios here, right? So let's say you're not necessarily going with a consultancy and you're trying to do it yourself, and you're an on-prem type of, you've got an on-prem footprint. That's how you've operated, and the traditional kind of teams that come with that. So infrastructure, service management, and the whole way of operating, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that's your starting place, and a data center is being decommissioned, or that's about to, you have to get out of on-prem, and you're not going to hire a consultancy. What do you think the first kind of place to start is, in terms of looking at how you're going to try and adopt this, make this change to cloud?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's. I think you would need to, have a, first of all, kind of a change in your charter, in your IT charter or strategy, if you like, in terms of saying, people kind of tend to migrate to cloud for the wrong reasons, and we've seen all the Gartner charts and whatever for that. So you'd want to do that for a good reason. So you need to have good reasons. You need to have like a charter or a strategy, to say, okay, we're going to look at cloud and see what we can use in cloud. So the motivation has to be there, but then you need really a team that can start looking at that, and you need to empower that team so they can make decisions, and those decisions need to be endorsed by the C-level,
right,
as well, in your organization. So a good example of that's like a cloud center of excellence, and that's something obviously that we kind of do with with our customers, but certainly customers can have the initial steps of starting that themselves, and that gives them the space and the freedom to be able to go and research a lot of things, and look at cloud and services and technologies that they can hopefully be able to leverage.
Okay, nice. So they're not in cloud. They understand their kind of business reasons, if you will, for taking this massive leap into operating in that different operating model, and then you requisite some skills into that team that are vaguely aligned with something to do with cloud strategy, cloud transformation, etc. Call it a center of excellence. And I guess how long before that team might start, like how do they start, right? So it's like, okay, I've got an understanding of why I'm doing this. I know what has to be done in terms of the outcome. My data center is being decommissioned. I have 100 apps or so that need to move over. Like, what happens next? Because it seems like there is probably stages to this, but it's not waterfall, right? It's not like design and plan and do all of these things, and then you do. There's like a chunk of time where you do, and then you move on. But what would, I guess, be the kind of different levels of maturity in how they might move?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there's multiple threads to that. So the requisition, as you said, of the right people is important. So if you don't have the skills in-house, then you may want to bring in a CTO or somebody at that sort of or enterprise architecture level that has that experience. So that person can kind of drive that strategy forward and help the CCOE to kind of put things into motion. Obviously, as we said, a partner is another way to do that, to help with kind of really setting up the CCOE and driving that. And then so having the right motivation, to migrate to cloud. And I think the kind of some of the reasons you listed is actually kind of more the desperation of, we need to, the lease is coming to an end in our data center, and we need, our CEO or CIO said we're not renewing, so we need to get out. Microsoft really doesn't want to support SQL version 1997 or 2002, whatever it is that that we have, and they're saying even the extended support is now finished. Please migrate, Mr. Customer. So we got 200 SQL instances or something, and we need to migrate those. So that's again sort of more of a desperation. So you want to kind of try and avoid those sort of things and kind of preempt some of that by putting this kind of strategy into place. And then it's really looking at, okay, so how do we migrate? We certainly need to migrate in stages. It's not going to be kind of just run one Terraform script and it's all in the cloud tomorrow. So we need to kind of understand how can we not just migrate but learn from the process of migration as well, so we can scale up, give our IT teams the opportunity to go and certify and train and learn from the process and things like that as well. So it's a gradual sort of program. And again, it depends if there's differences between a digital transformation of somebody versus a cloud migration or an app migration. Those are all different things. So and it also depends on what kind of an enterprise you are, what kind of an organization are you. So if you're kind of more of a an established sort of organization, then you have obviously a lot of heritage from the data center that you need to bring with you, or you need to make decisions whether that gets retained and you just sweat those assets in either in your own data center if you're not leaving the data center completely, or in a colo situation of some kind. So that all of that is part of the decision process, and then obviously you look at things like data. So again, do we just continue doing the same corporate database but now in the cloud, or do we look at some alternative options and things like that? So all of those need to be considerations. So once you've kind of done your charter and the reasons why, you kind of look at those, and then it's really down to, okay, so let's actually now look at migrating some applications or utilizing the cloud for certain services that are already there. And if you're a startup, it's great because I've seen before kind of success stories where a company jumps straight into doing serverless, and their website, which was taking orders from customers, up and running within 90 days.
Wow,
all in serverless. And this was actually a true life thing. So so if you don't have any of that sort of legacy and heritage perhaps, and you're a startup or something, I think you guys mentioned that kind of scenario in a previous talk as well. And that's easier for you because you've got no assets. You don't have to worry about sort of that sort of heritage and so on. But otherwise it's a gradual process. You look at kind of the low hanging fruits of what you can migrate, and you go from there really.
Nice.
That would be kind of maybe the first sort of phase of the migration, and then the more difficult applications or the ones that really cannot be moved for potentially security reasons or regulatory reasons or something, then you have to make a different decision for those.
And what are your thoughts on, like, I guess there's low-hanging fruit, which is quick wins, things that you can kind of migrate quickly, and then the other kind of end of the spectrum is like the really hard stuff, and which one to bite off first, because the hard thing is going to prove something, right? It's proving the fact that this ridiculously complicated application and all of its components can be moved, and therefore, because that is a culmination of all your potential patterns or whatever of apps, then you're pretty much doing the work there, and implying that everything else that you do will become easier, or kind of starting really at the bottom of the rung, something that you can kind of quickly and easily migrate and get kind of buy-in and move that way. What are your kind of thoughts on both ends?
So I think for that it's down to the skills and the capability that your team has at the moment. So if they are a little bit more sort of cloud savvy and aware, and they have some experience, or they've just come into the organization, so a little bit more kind of from that background, then you could potentially look at that slightly more complicated application and move that as a service into the cloud. But otherwise, I think if you're really starting from scratch and so on, the low-hanging fruits are the easier applications that you need to migrate. Exactly. And the good thing I think about that as well is that obviously there's less risk, of doing that, because the other applications are more complex beast to migrate, and then you have to really get that right, and you got sort of user acceptance testing and all the other stuff to go behind that. But the simpler applications are also the way that you would take that success to other stakeholders, those who are looking after those more complex applications, and actually use those success stories that you've had, those initial migrations, as the poster child for convincing other stakeholders within the organization. And like I said before, I think people underestimate the experience that you get from just doing that and doing maybe things like hackathons with your partner or whatever that you're working with as well. I think all of that builds confidence in your IT team.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, because I guess no matter what, if you've got a partner doing it, you're doing it yourself, a migration in, company A is going to differ massively from company B because everything around it does, right?
Yeah.
The systems that they use, the people that you have, the operating model or whatever it is that's in your existing organization, how people talk to each other, those communication flows, etc. So it makes absolute sense to kind of start off small and learn and grow and do more and more kind of riskier things, if you will, but kind of grow your capability with the risk that you're taking.
Correct. Yeah, and I think also where you end up in the cloud is important. So you need to have a goal of which part of the cloud, if you like, you're going to end up in. So
what do you mean by that? Sorry.
So I break it down into kind of 4 stages really. So and this is based on the standard 6 R's. It's not anything revolutionary really, but prior to the pandemic, I used to whiteboard this with customers, and it kind of really worked very well because it used to help them appreciate and understand, where they are and what does it take to go into the cloud and where they're going to potentially end up and so on. So the 4 stages is, the kind of lift and shift. So you're just kind of moving what you have in the, in your data center, potentially a virtual machine, into somebody else's virtual machine, essentially. And then the second is kind of where you do containerize the application, but it's the same old monolithic app that you had with a few modifications, essentially. So that's a kind of a lift and reshape, if you like, a stage 2. And then stage 3 is where it gets really kind of, tough, and where you start looking at things like cultural shifts. So things like, DevOps comes in. And there you're really looking at, so if you are development heavy, for example, you have a lot of developers or whatever, you're not a kind of an off the shelf. Stage 3 is really all about, breaking up those monolithic applications into at least modules, and if not, dare I say, microservices of some kind. Yes. So that's where you really are, redesigning or refactoring your applications. That's kind of stage 3. And then stage 4 is a complete re-architecture of what you have. So that's where you go wild on things like serverless and function as a service and policy as code, and bring in things like GitOps and stuff like that, and do SRE for the support and so on. So so that's a re-architecture.
So do you think that the end state for all things running should be serverless? Because it feels like, that is one way of operating, right? It's you're kind of implying a few things. I guess there's serverless, i.e. you're not maintaining, you don't have any kind of oversight or insight into the infrastructure that it's running. You've got no operational concerns. And then there's things like event-driven architecture and functions as a service and all that kind of stuff, right? So are you saying that just making sure that you're not looking after the infrastructure should be the direction for everyone? Or do you reckon it kind of depends on the organization and the type that they are and what they want to do?
I think it's probably actually dependent on their strategy and ambitions rather than the organization or the tech.
Right. Cool.
So everybody should be able to and could achieve that.
Mhm.
But whether it can be done or whether you kind of
sense
want
to.
to do that, and whether it's possible to do that. So sometimes, like I said, you're restricted by regulations in your industry or something like that.
Right.
So there's certain types of workloads you just can't really move, or you can't move that far into the cloud.
Okay.
And that kind of line gets kind of goes more solid as you kind of go towards serverless and all that kind of stage 4. Whereas kind of in the lift and shifts is slightly more, it's kind of more, it's not as it's not as solid when it comes to cloud native,
right,
as you're moving in that journey. So I think it's possible, and organizations should try and aim for that if they can, if it's, like I said, feasible within what they're doing and their markets. But it's not a let's just go completely 100% by tomorrow afternoon. We're going to be serverless. I don't think that's the kind of the right approach.
It's a journey, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And I guess there's that journey costs something. In that you might have a team that's skilled up in doing one thing, and now you're kind of saying make the necessary moves if it makes sense to target this type of thing. Kind of like aim for the moon and you might reach, or aim for the stars and you might reach the moon, or that one of those typical kind of sayings here. It's like if you're kind of aiming to get somewhere and you end up putting in all of the kind of practices and things along the way, then you've succeeded in at least what the business needs, which is to kind of function in a more operationally efficient way. I
mean, I think you still need to your aim needs to be realistic, and it needs to be in response to what the business needs. So it does need to kind of have that in mind at all times. And you shouldn't be kind of saying, well, let's just go serverless and do stage 4 because that's the latest tech and and whatever. And I kind of fancy playing with all those technologies. It needs to be responsive to what the business requirements are. So whether that's innovation, competition, within your markets, or maybe expansion, acquisition. So you might have acquired somebody else and they're more advanced in terms of their tech than you are, or less advanced than you are. How do you bring the two together? And and I mean, I had that example quite recently where customers, that one customer that acquired somebody else, and one was in AWS and one was in Azure. It's like, okay, wait,
polycloud.
Polycloud, hybrid multi-polycloud.
Exactly.
Exactly. So how do we do that as a one strategy? How do we bring those services together? So I think it needs to be for the right reasons.
Okay. That makes sense. And then, all right, so let's say you've got, you're kind of aiming there, and you're starting with sort of the lift, tinker shift, containerization or something like that. Maybe, re-architecting at some stage. There's this concept nowadays with like platform engineering, like DevOps and then platform engineering. What do you make of that? And how do you think it's a good idea for organizations to adopt platform engineering? What does platform engineering even mean to you?
I mean, I think it's there seems to be, we kind of started with DevOps, let's say, or in that sort of space of moving away from the from the old way of kind of developing applications. We kind of broke them up and applied agile methodologies and so on. We had all these tools. We came up with pipelines, and then you had this kind of the growth of CI/CD vendors in that space offering more or less kind of the same thing. So that's fine. And I think what has happened a few times in the cloud and cloud native space is that we've run away with an idea and kind of really got excited by it.
A new term.
And then we've gone, we forgot to do XYZ, or halfway along the way, this is getting really complicated. We need to go back to the drawing board and separate things out or rethink something. So a typical example was, DevOps, and then it went to DevSecOps. So we kind of thought, okay, we didn't actually put any security in any of that source code that we downloaded from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we need to actually really kind of scan for that and scan for vulnerabilities. So we need to change DevOps to DevSecOps. And then now I think the split with platform engineering is that we're saying, platform engineering takes care of the establishment of those tools and platforms to actually do development.
Right.
And then the DevOps comes in and actually does the development aspect of it and make use of those tools. So we're kind of splitting what's platform, how do you set up your sort of DevOps platform versus actually how you use essentially your DevOps platform. And I think that's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of removes the burden from the developers to figure out all these tools and the pipeline and stuff like that. Some may resist that and may actually want to do it themselves because that's kind of all part of their sort of world.
Yeah.
And others might be quite open to today. And just leave me to develop stuff. I can hit the commit button and then I don't have to worry about it. It kind of moves on from that from that stage of the pipeline to the next.
Would you say it's more kind of a centralized, because you talked about sort of platform teams and then DevOps people still doing the still using the platform tooling if you like to help the applications teams get their app deployed, etc. Would you say that they work hand in hand in that way, or that sort of platform teams are a kind of centralization of that of the sort of DevOps methodology, in that instead of getting all of these teams to individually create their own patterns, right, you've now got simple ways of operating and maintaining patterns, and they are just consumers of those patterns, right?
They can be, but I mean, I think a lot of developers tend to be quite opinionated, right? So and the whole sort of dev and ops was to kind of bring those together. So I wouldn't necessarily want to separate things again,
right,
and have DevOps over there and platform engineering over here, and kind of the two are not talking to each other, and that kind of reestablish that wall that used to be between development and operations. So I certainly want them proactively involved and engaged in that, because after all, they're the consumers of it, as you said.
Yeah.
And if they're not happy with what they're consuming, they're not going to consume it, basically.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that, yes, they are involved in that process to whatever degree. That's down to the teams to make that decision, really.
And then where does the kind of cloud center of excellence fit in all of this?
Well, CCO is still the overarching umbrella, really, for all of that. So it's encompassing a lot of these decisions. It's facilitating kind of this cooperation and collaboration between all these different teams. It's defining the standards for that, and it's bringing in the correct people into the CCOE, so that we can utilize their expertise and knowledge and experience in those areas, so they can contribute to the cloud strategy and the cloud sort of operating model, if you like. So it's part of the whole sort of approach to how we're going to do this stage tree, which is kind of essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And how that's going to really work, for us in terms of how we develop applications, going forward, as well as obviously other things like, cultural change and change of process, change of, sort of skills of the people, the whole sort of, PPT kind of approach to it. So that's, I think CCO is still the overarching sort of,
body,
team. Yeah. And driving that strategy, implementing things like DevOps and platform engineering.
Feels like there's a bit of an overlap, right, between kind of CCOE and a platform team, because I guess a platform team, they're a team and their user is a developer or not like someone that is trying to iterate on an application and take it to production. And they have to have a relationship to the users, right? So that kind of product manager or user developer experience person, whatever, is like is interviewing, is keeping that relationship quite tight and that feedback loop quite tight. But then the center of excellence is maybe doing that same thing from a different approach, slightly different mindset. I guess, how do you see that overlap working? Have you seen that in many orgs, like having both of those teams operate in sort of tandem?
I think the main struggle for people tends to be actually just setting up something that will that will work. So that kind of putting that CCOE together. So I think there's less kind of that occurrence. But like I said, I think for me, the CCO should be encompassing all of it, because it's the it's the entity within the organization that's been empowered to go and make these decisions.
Right.
And it needs to bring in, if you have a platform engineering team, then
That's part.
they need to be part of that.
Right. Okay.
They need to be contributing that. If you have, like I said, if you're development heavy in your organization, the dev team needs to be there, as well as your SRE, so site reliability engineering team, if you have one, or your cloud ops, if you want to call it that, or whatever. So
many terms.
Yeah, so many terms. I know. I think all of that needs to be contributory, or they all need to be contributing,
Right.
and having their say, really.
Yeah, fair. All right. So we've got the kind of big banner of CCOE, a bunch of different kind of teams or people kind of responsible for those teams in CCOE. We've got a bunch of apps that are kind of almost, migrating in whichever one of these different 4 different kind of operating or target operating models. I don't know what to call it. The 4 that you described.
Yeah, I mean, those are just kind of the stages of the journey.
The stages of the journey.
Your CCA will still need to have a target operating model, a cloud operating model of some kind.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And so, what are the in like that's how you do it. What are the kind of common mistakes of setting up a kind of CCOE that you've seen?
Yes, I mean, probably, and this is, I think, across the board. I think all 3 leading cloud providers agree on it, and I kind of having read their sort of white papers on that as well, and understood that as being their sort of stance as well. It's things like not having the endorsement of the board, the C-level, the CEO essentially, and the CIO, not being empowered so they can actually make the decisions, and then organizations or other departments kind of dragging their feet to follow the CCO in what the CCO is set to be the way forward to adopting cloud. So those can be certainly part of it. And then the other one is not really understanding what the CCOE is supposed to be doing, and maybe getting too involved in the technical bits and pieces of something. And that's actually not what you're supposed to be necessarily doing. Sure, we can sit down and do a proof of concept and decide on whether we go with cloud A or cloud B. But that's something that we kind of decide based on a number of criteria that shouldn't be encompassing and engulfing the whole of the CCOE, and everybody's doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right, so we've got a way to kind of build that team, the types of things that team is kind of responsible for. I think that pretty much, I mean, we've spoken about a hell of a lot there. Anything else that you want to kind of cover in the CCOE area? No,
I think that's kind of, like I said, I think the difficulty for organizations is, again, having that time to understand the CCOE. So obviously a shortcut way of doing that is to have a partner to help you, to do that, because they would, come in and help you to establish that. At least the kind of the beginning, and then later on when you're sort of way down the line and you've had some experience of migrating applications into the cloud and so on, for us, we would expect the customer then to take over really, and kind of it'll be made up more of the customers team than our team.
That's the goal, right? I guess is to, in the end, ensure that the customer has the right tools and skills to kind of deliver. Great. No, I mean, this has been fantastic. Obviously, thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
And talking to us. How can people find you if they want to hear more?
Well, they can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm more than happy to connect with people. One of the things I really enjoy doing is kind of being a cloud native citizen, as I call it, and kind of connecting with people who are kind of enthusiastic in the same way as I am about cloud and so on, and kind of being in that sort of community really. The other place, of course, is to check out my YouTube channel called the Cloud Therapist. So if you just type in Cloud Therapist on YouTube, or I think they have the @Cloud Therapist now, you can have as well.
Nice.
Cloud Therapist is a YouTube channel where I do lots of cloud native talks. Various different people, so good fun. And have you got any talks coming up? Well, I just released one quite recently about EKS Anywhere. Oh, nice. With AWS, so that was a good talk. yeah, there's different type of sort of segments on the channel that I do. There's a monthly one, which is kind of a longer discussion. We just pick on sort of 3 topics, myself and my a friend from a research company, and we just discuss those sort of 3 topics and have a bit of a rant, as we call it. It's always good fun to do. And then there's another segment which kind of focuses on sort of talks that are 15 minutes or less.
Okay.
So, anybody who's kind of subscribed or is watching one of those knows that that's going to be a 15-minute, easily digestible,
nice,
kind of easy to watch type of talk. But yeah, it's good fun. I enjoy doing it, and it's kind of really started as a way for me to learn from other people, which is great, because you learn so much from doing that, and kind of researching things and then just letting them talk and learning from the sort of things that they're talking about, and it gives you different ideas. And it also, I think, allows me to kind of as somebody put it recently to me, paying it forward. They said you pay it forward, which is really good. And I enjoy doing that, because I have a lot, a big passion for STEM and stuff like that as well. I do that with schools and universities. I go out and talk to them about careers in IT and things
fantastic.
like that. Yeah, so really good fun. I enjoy doing that, and obviously it gives me connections within that community, which is also brilliant.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on board.
Pleasure.
Cheers.